Well, hello there, Tankers of the Blitz universe. I'm Flossie, and today I figured I should do a video ranking all of the tier 10s, not by their gameplay style, not by how good they are in battle, but by their looks. This is something that was suggested to me on my Discord channel by a fellow subscriber, and I thought it was a fantastic idea. Something new, something different. I haven't really seen this done before, so that is what this video will be all about. If you out there are not yet in my Discord channel and you do want to maybe give a suggestion or two that could be used in an upcoming video, do so by all means. It'll be linked down below in the description. Anyways, let's take a look at my magnificent tier list to see what these ranks are going to be. So, of course, we start off with Giga Chad, which is the best of the best. These are tanks that look absolutely amazing, in my personal opinion, and ones that I like to play simply because they look good. Looks maxing. I don't really know why I named these tiers this, but here we are. Looks maxing is for tanks that aren't necessarily my absolute favorite, but they are good-looking tanks in my opinion. Then we have decent, which obviously the name speaks for itself. They are decent-looking tanks. Then we have meh, which is kind of awful. Not awful, but not really great-looking tanks. They aren't like horrible, but they're not that great either. So that's the meh category. And then finally we have goofy, which are just the absolute worst looking tanks. They're super ugly in my opinion, and that's all there really is to say about that. So we're going to be breaking into every single tier 10 in the entire game. As you can see here, I have them listed out. So let's jump right on into all of these tanks. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this wacky video that I feel like making. So here's the Sheridan. This is tank number 1. And what do I think of its looks? Well, honestly, I like the look of the front of the tank. I think the turret has nice angles overall. I do like the sort of weird boat-shaped hull of the turret, or the boat-shaped look of the turret. It kind of angles downwards and in. That's kind of cool. The front looks pretty sleek. It has a nice angle to it. However, when you turn around and look at the rear of the Sheridan, yeah, that's where the problems start to arise. This thing is just basically a rectangle. It's like the designer of this tank would put all this time and effort into designing the front of this tank, and then they just kind of lost interest or had too much to drink when they designed the rear. This is a pretty awful looking rear, and for that reason, I can't really give it a high rating. It's not exactly an awful looking tank, but it's not very good either, so it's going to go into the decent category, kind of the middle of the pack. Next up, of course, we have the M48 Patton. Now, this tank, if it was in terms of gameplay, it would be pretty high up there, but because this is just about looks, I personally don't really like the look of this tank. I think it just has a lot of odd angles. Like, the rear is just huge for whatever reason. The engine deck kind of sticks up way too far, and it just kind of looks too bulky and large for a medium tank, in my opinion. I do like the turret, though, and it's not the worst looking tank. I'll give it that. It's, again, I think this tank deserves to go into the decent category, so let's put that in there. Now, next up, we have the M60, which is very similar to the M48 Patton, except I think it's uglier. I really don't like how the hull is not really a boat shape. Like, it's kind of smooth on the Patton, and then this one, it just has a super sharp angle. Maybe it's partly because this thing doesn't have PBR yet, but I just think this is way uglier than the M48. It also has this humongous light on the front, and the gun barrel is absolutely tiny, which just makes the turret look super oversized. And honestly, just overall, I think the tank is way too boxy. I just don't really like the look of it. So for that reason, I am going to be putting the M60 in meh. It's not the worst, but I don't really like the look of it at all. Now we move on to the Yo. This is a tank that, well, I don't really know what to think of it. It's very, very weird looking. I am using it, of course, with the 2-shot gun, so the gun is a bit bigger than the 3-shot, but regardless, like, this tank just has the weirdest looking hull I've ever seen. Like, why are there little bits sticking up further than the other? The turret is kind of like sunken into the hull in a way, and then it has like this oscillating bit, obviously, on top, and just the 2 hatches. It just looks so goofy, which is why I really don't like the look of this tank. I think it's going into the goofy category, as it should. Again, this tank does not look very good, so let's put it down there. Yeah, the Yo is just not a very good looking tank. That's all I'm going to say. Moving on to the Concept 1B. Now, this is a tank that I personally love playing, but again, like I said, this is about its looks, and it looks really strange. But in a way, I almost like the look of it. I like how low slung it is. It's very low to the ground. I do kind of like how squished the turret is. It kind of looks unique. Like, I don't know. There's just something about the tank that makes it look kind of cool. So for that reason, I'm not going to be putting this as low down as many of you might think. I actually do somewhat like the look of the concept, so it'll be going into decent. Now we have the T95 E6. This is a tank that I think is pretty ugly. However, it's one of those tanks that, like, if a couple of things were a bit different about it, it would actually look really nice. First off, this here tumor on the side is what absolutely ruins the look of the tank. I don't know what this is for, but it is hideous. I absolutely hate it, as well as the hatch that just sticks out so much from the rest of the turret. And honestly, the turret's not even symmetrical. It has, like, this weird, like, lopsided look to it. I just really don't like this tank at all. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact it doesn't have PBR. This tank, in my opinion, is just super ugly. So as of right now, it's going to be going into the goofy category. Next up, we have the T57 Heavy, and this is a tank that, honestly, I don't mind the look of it. I think the turret's way too big, though. I think it's just, like, huge. Like, I don't know why it sticks out, like, over the tracks. It kind of has this weird, like, bulb shape to it. And honestly, the back of it is okay. Again, like, all these American tanks just have such, like, plain, like, hulls. They're kind of just boxy. I mean, again, this tank doesn't look too bad, so honestly, I'm going to put this in the decent category. It definitely could be worse. It could be like the E6, and it could have a giant hatch on top. But anyways, there we are. Next up, we have the E5. Now, this is a tank that I actually really like the look of. It has kind of the nice boat-shaped hull on the front that the M48 Patton has. It has, overall, I mean, the rear of it's kind of boring or whatever, but I like the turret. It's like the E6 turret, minus the hatch and the super weird, like, ball thing on the side of it. So I think this tank looks really sleek. I like how big the gun is compared to the rest of the tank. I think it's pretty well, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's well balanced in terms of its looks. Like, I think the turret size matches well with the gun size, which matches well with the hull. So for that reason, I'm going to put this tank into looks maxing. I can't believe I named these freaking categories this. This is so stupid. Anyways, it's going to looks maxing. Next up, a tank that definitely is not going into looks maxing. This is the XM66F. This is one of the ugliest tank destroyers I've ever seen in my life. It literally looks like someone put the top of a burger onto a tank and called it a day. The back of it is insanely boxy. It is literally like someone put an air conditioning unit on the back, and I really don't like the look of this tank. So for that reason, this is definitely going into the goofy category. Sorry, XM, but it just has to be done. Next up, we have the E3, and this is a tank that, honestly, I think it looks better than the XM. I don't really think it looks all that good, though. The back of it, again, it looks like someone stuck another AC unit on the back. But overall, I mean, it looks okay for what it is. Honestly, there's not much really else to say about it. At least the gun kind of matches with the size of the rest of the tank. The XM kind of has a little tiny pew-pew gun, which it looks a little bit stupid. But this one actually kind of matches the overall look of the tank. So honestly, the E3, it's not great looking, but it's also not, like, worst of the worst. So it's going to go into the meh category. Next up, we do have the T110 E4, and honestly, this tank does look better than the E3 in a way. I just kind of like how the overall, like, superstructure or turret on the E4 is kind of smaller and more low down than the E3. I think that looks better. I also think the design of the rear kind of engine deck looking thing looks better than the E3's. I kind of like how it angles up. It almost looks like a spoiler in a way, like a supercar spoiler. I don't know why, but in my opinion, this tank does look better than the E3. So for that reason, I think I am going to put it into the decent category. Nothing special, but it also doesn't look too terrible in my opinion. Now, we have the German tanks, starting off with the KPZ 50-ton. Now, I think this tank looks absolutely amazing. I really like how like low down it is. A lot of tanks that are lower down in this game look better, in my opinion. However, One thing that I really don't like the look of is how there's like this really weird extra gun thing that's sort of slapped onto the turret. It's almost like they just took a giant weight and kind of compressed the metal in the turret and then stuck that gun on it. It really looks weird, but from this angle at least, where you can't see that, it looks amazing. I really like the sort of details with the light. I like the shape of the hull. I think it reminds me a little bit of the IS-7, but also the width of the tank, it looks pretty good. So overall, I mean, this tank looks decent, but again, that gun port on the top, or the gun thing on top of it, kind of ruins it for me. So it's just going to go into decent. It would have been higher up if the turret looked a little bit better. Now, the Leo 1. This is a tank that I really like the look of. I think it's well balanced in terms of how big the gun is to the rest of the tank. Its turret is a decent size, and overall the engine deck doesn't look too ugly, even if it is a little boxy. I think this tank looks great, like I said, and there's nothing really to complain about it. So for that reason, it is going to go into the looks maxing category. Next up, we do have the E50M. This is a tank that, honestly, it's really, really boxy, so you'd expect me to think, well, because it's so boxy, it's kind of ugly and kind of lame, but I actually like the look of it. I think it's well balanced, again, in terms of its sort of gun ratio to the turret size to the hull. The hull is pretty big compared to the turret, but I do kind of like that about it, and I almost like this, I don't know, it's not an octagon, it's like a hexagon shape almost for the turret design. It doesn't have any like really strange angles, and although it does have like these weird ball-looking things on the side, at least it's symmetrical, so I guess that's good. And overall, I do like the look of this tank, so in my opinion, it is going to go as well beside the Leopard up there. Next up, we have the VK90, and this is a tank that, well, it doesn't look terrible. I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't look great either, but I think that's mainly because it is a rear-turreted tank. Rear-turreted tanks just have a disadvantage in terms of the look department, because having a turret at the rear of the tank is just kind of goofy in general. But it doesn't have any, like, weird things sticking out of it besides the hatch on the roof, and overall the design looks fairly decent. So, for that reason, I'm going to put it into the decent category. Doesn't look terrible, but I don't exactly think it looks that great. Next up, we have the VK72. This is a really weird-looking tank. I don't know why the person, whoever designed this tank, sort of went for a very flat frontal design, and then they were like, ah, yes, let's just put a super round cylinder on the rear of it for a turret. I just don't really understand this design, and for that reason, it just has so many weird angles. Like, what is this triangle bit that's, like, connecting the turret back to the hull? I don't even know how to explain it. It's just so weird. I also don't like how the front track wheel is just so much bigger than the rest of them, and it's so much more raised up. I just think that looks a little goofy. So honestly, this tank, I'm not a big fan of its looks, so it's going to go down into the meh category. It's definitely not the worst of the worst, but it's pretty down there. In terms of the E100, this is a tank that I actually think looks pretty good, considering it is just a giant box. I almost like the way that the turret is super boxy, whereas the tracks, or the armor covering the tracks, is more rounded. I think it has a good sort of shape to it, and overall the gun matches the tank's design. I think if the gun was smaller, if I did have the 128mm on it, like the mouse gun, then it would look really weird. Like this right here, this looks weird. This does not match the tank's appearance, but with the bigger gun, which is where I will be ranking it, it does look and match the tank's appearance. I do like the back. I like the exhausts, the twin kind of pipes sticking out of the back. I don't really know what their name is, but yeah, overall, I do like the look of the E100. I always have, even without its PBR. So I'm going to put it into the decent category. It's kind of in between decent and looks maxing in my opinion, because for a boxy tank, it is one of the better looking ones. So back to the game we go. Here we have the mouse. Now this thing I don't think looks as good as the E100. I just don't like how flat the sides are. I also think the turret has some weird angles. Like, it's kind of like a half moon shape. It's not really a flat angle, which I think might have looked better because it would have matched what the hull armor has. So yeah, overall, I mean, it's not a terrible looking tank. It's not great either. I personally am not a big fan of it, but it's going to go into the decent category besides the E100. It would be kind of in between meh and decent. Next up, we have the Jagdpanzer E100. Now, because this is basically an E100 without the turret, you'd think, oh yeah, he might actually like the look of it. But they made it look like a shoe. Like, they made the turret, they pushed it all the way back, then they just kind of slapped a couple of weird-looking doors on the back of this thing and called it a day. Honestly, I don't know what would make the tank look better. At least the gun kind of matches the rest of this tank's size. It also has this weird hatch on top that's just such, like an eyesore, in my opinion. So yeah, in my opinion, this tank is not very good looking. I'm going to put it into the meh category, because I honestly don't like the look of it as much as the 100, or even the mouse for that instance. Anyways, moving on, we have the Grille. Now, this is a tank that I do like the look of. I think the oversized gun kind of makes up for the fact that it's super small and really just not much of anything. There's not really much going on with this tank. I do like how the tracks are made. They kind of look like the E50M's tracks in a way. Honestly, the hull kind of works in a way. I don't know. There's just something about this tank. The fact that its gun is so large compared to the rest of the tank, it almost works in a way. Like, you really don't expect something like this to work looks-wise, but in my opinion, it does. It's definitely not the best looking thing in the world, though, so for now, I'll put it in the decent category. Maybe at the end of the video, I'll switch up some of my opinions, but as of right now, that's where it is going to be. Now, in terms of the T100 LT, this tank, honestly, it looks okay. I think the turret is actually, like, a little bit weird. I don't like how it, like, angles up at the back. I feel like if the turret was, like, more snug with the rest of the hull, it might look better. But overall, I do like how low profile it is. Again, like I said before, low profile tanks, in my opinion, just look better in general. I do like the sort of lights it has on it, and I like the log on the back. It kind of looks like a spoiler again, like a race car spoiler. So honestly, for that reason and the angles at the front, I do like the look of it. I think it's going to go into this category here, the looks maxing category, because I do think it looks better than all of the other tanks in the tier below it. Anyways, next up we have the T22 medium. This is a tank I really like the look of. I think it's very, very sleek. I like the roundness of the turret. It is an actual, like, symmetrical looking turret. There's no weird, like, lumps on the side of it, like weird hatches and stuff. So I also like the look of the lower plate. It kind of has like a diamond shape to it, and the sides and rear look pretty solid as well. The tracks also look pretty good. So yeah, overall, I think the T22 is a pretty good looking tank, so I'm going to put it into the looks maxing category as well. And moving on, a lot of these Russian tanks actually look pretty good. The 140, now this is a tank I really like the look of. I think the turret design is fantastic. I like how low profile it is. It's not as, like, big and bulky as the T22's turret, but it still has that nice round shape to it. As well, the hull has a very nice angle to it. It doesn't really have anything ugly going for it. And again, this is one of my preferred tanks in terms of looks. So I'm actually going to put it into the Giga Chad category. I think the tank looks fantastic. Next up, we do have the Object 907. Now, this tank, it also looks pretty good in my opinion. It's a little bit too wide though. I don't know why. This tank just looks super wide for whatever reason, comparing it to, like, the Object 140. Its hull at the front also has a really weird looking shape to it. It almost looks like the, what's that tank on PC called? I can't think of the name of it. The quad-tracked heavy tank on PC, 279E. It kind of looks like that kind of hull. It looks pretty cool, although the turret has a really weird, like, kind of flat spot. You can see at the side here, it goes kind of flat at the top, and then another, like, random round part in the middle of it. I don't know. There's just something off about it, even though it doesn't look terrible. So for that reason, I'm going to put this tank into the decent category. Again, guys, this is only my opinion. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own opinion on what tanks look good and which ones don't, so keep that in mind. Next up, we have the 62A. This tank, I think, looks pretty solid. It's kind of like the 140 in terms of its turret design, although I do think the 140 looks a bit better than it because the 140 is, like, less big. I think the 140, yeah, its angling is kind of... It has a steeper angle, and the 62A doesn't really. Its rear is also kind of weird. I don't know why the log is kind of, like, in between the tracks and in the middle of the rear. I don't really get that. But I do like the look of this tank. I just don't think it's the best of the best. So for that reason, I'll put it in decent for now, up with the 907. I think it's an okay looking tank, but it's nothing special. Now, taking a look at the Object 260. This is a tank I actually like the look of. I know some people are probably going to disagree with me on this, but I think that weird angles at the front, it kind of looks like a better version of the IS-7. I do like the look of the IS-7, but I think this tank just looks better than it. I do like again, like the triangular angles of the front. I like the pike nose it has, and overall I think the turret size matches with the hull, and the gun matches with the rest of the tank's size as well. So for that reason, I think I'll put this tank in looks maxing. Might surprise some of you, but I do really like the look of it. Next up, we have the Object 777. Yeah, this tank doesn't look all that good. I don't know what this weird gun thing at the back is, but it's really hideous. It just kind of sticks out from the rest of the turret for absolutely no reason. It's not even, like, centered. I mean, the gun itself is centered, but the thing attaching it is to the right-hand side, which is just completely weird. Also, the hull is just really small, and it's kind of wedged in between the tracks. Like, the tracks are just sticking out so far from the rest of the tank. I just don't think this tank looks very good. It's going to go into the meh category, in my opinion, because it's not, like, awful, but it's not very good looking either. Next up, the IS-4. Now, this tank, honestly, it's not as good looking as, like, a 260. I think the 260 just beats this thing in the looks department altogether. But it doesn't look too bad either. I do like the quad kind of fuel barrels at the back. I like the overall hull shape. I think it's symmetrical enough to where it looks good. I think, yeah, there's enough detail in it to where I think this tank looks decent. But again, as I just said, it's going to be decent and nothing more. Not a crazy good looking tank, but it's not bad either. Now, taking a look at the IS-7. This tank I actually do like the look of. I like how the turret is so, like, close to the hull. There's no real, like, turret gap like what the IS-4 has here at the front. It's really, like, lined up well. I think the hull, again, like the 260, it has that pike nose hull. I do like the look of that, and I like the rear of the IS-7 as well. I think it has some unique angles going for it, and overall, this is a good-looking tank. So although I do prefer the look of the 260 in general, I do think the IS-7 is still up there in the looks maxing category. Again, guys, I'm sorry, these titles are very cringe. I know what I did. Don't you worry. Next up, we have the V4. Now, this is a tank that I really don't like the look of. I think it has some of the weirdest looking angles ever. The back of it just has, like, it looks like some 5-year-old just slapped this together in about 2 minutes. Like, the hull design is actually okay, but I just think the turret kind of ruins it. As well, the gun mantlet is just so out of place. Like, it's so big and kind of just a round sphere. I just really don't like the look of it at all. So, for that reason, it's not a terrible, like, it's not the worst of the worst, but it's not a great looking tank, so it's going to go into the meh category. Next up, we do have the 268. And now this tank is actually the first tier 10 I grinded, and there is a reason for that. It was because of the looks. Again, I think the rear log kind of thing looks like a spoiler on a drag car, and for that reason, that was actually the reason I decided I wanted to grind this tank. I thought it looked really, really cool, and I think it still does look really cool. I like all of the weird angles on it. I think the turret actually works with the rest of the tank. I know it's not, like, anything crazy. It kind of has this weird, like, boxy shape at the back, but I think it works. I honestly think the overall design of this tank looks good. So for that reason, I'm going to be putting it probably higher up than a lot of you think. I'm going to put it in the looks maxing category. Next up, we have the 263. Now, this tank, It honestly looks better since it got PBR. I think that kind of helped the overall shape with it. Before it got PBR, the hull was kind of too small and the superstructure was too big. Now they kind of made that the opposite. They gave it this cool bar thing that wraps around the back as well. I do like the dozer blade, like the bulldozer kind of blade thing on the back as well. I think this is a pretty good looking tank, and I think the gun kind of matches with the rest of the tank's feel and look. So yeah, I do like this tank's look, and for that reason, it's going to go up with the 268 in the looks maxing category. Now, moving on to the British tanks, we have the Vickers Light, and honestly, this tank doesn't look very good in my opinion. I think the turret is way too big for the hull. You can see how big it is here. It literally sticks out like a good like foot from the rest of the hull, and for that reason, like the tracks are also kind of just sticking out too much. The front and rear kind of just look weird. These two lights at the front, I don't really like the look of those. So yeah, I mean, I think overall the main thing that I don't like about it is just how big the turret is, like I said. I think if the turret was a bit smaller or a different shape to match the hull, it might look a bit better. But for that reason, definitely not the worst looking tank, but it's just going to go into meh, I think. It's kind of in between decent and meh. Next up, we have the 4202. Now, this tank looked a lot better without PBR. I think Wargaming kind of ruined the look of it in a way. I mean, technically, it looks a little bit better with the graphics being PBR. But the overall design, they changed it around so the turret is absolutely huge now. Before the turret was a lot smaller, and I think it looked a lot better like that. But now the turret is a complete eyesore. It's just this giant cylinder with these random shapes and stuff that aren't even symmetrical on the sides. You can see this side has like a weird like cutout, and this side doesn't. I just really don't like the look of it. I think the hull looks okay, but the turret, again, like the Vickers, the turret just kind of ruins the tank's look for me. So for that reason, I do think it looks better than the Vickers. Actually, it's so hard to choose. You know what? I'll put it in meh for now because I really just don't like that turret at all. But it's kind of in between, similar to the Vickers. It's in between decent and meh. So next up we have the Chieftain Mk. This is a tank that I think looks absolutely fantastic. Even though it has this really weird like box thing on the side of its turret, I still think it works. Even though, again, like the turret's not symmetrical in any way because of all these weird extra things that are going on with it. I do think the hull looks really, really good. I like the overall angles of it. I think the rear works well with the rest of the tank's design, as well as the gun has this cool, unique, like wrap kind of thing over it, whatever that's called. And I think overall, this tank looks really, really nice. Definitely one of my favorite looking tier 10 heavies. So it's going up into the Giga Chad. I think this is a Giga Chad looking tank right here. Next up, the Super Conk. Now, although this isn't a bad looking tank, I just think its turret design is very strange. Overall, the hull seems to be like too long for the rest of the tank in a way. I find like if this tank was a little bit shorter and maybe this weird like bulby looking thing at the back of the turret was kind of gone, then it might look better. Also, the hatch kind of looks weird. I don't like it how it has this weird bar going through it. Yeah, so overall, I mean, the tank's gun looks cool, though. I like how it has these, like, extra armor pieces underneath. And I do like the look of the spaced armor kind of sticking out of the front. But overall, it's not my favorite. I do think it looks way worse than the Chieftain. But I'm still going to put it into the decent category because, again, it's not horrible. It's just not anything really crazy good. And, yeah. Anyways, moving on to the 215B. I think this tank looks absolutely horrible. I really don't like the rear turreted design of it, even if the turret is pretty clean and it kind of has the same turret design as the Super Conk minus the spaced armor. I just don't think that hatch really works with it. It's actually, technically, I like the hatch better than the one on the Super Conk. But I just don't think the hull really matches with the turret's design. I think the hull is just too big, or like there's just something off about it. I also don't like the side skirts, how they kind of go halfway down the tracks, but then you can see these tiny little wheels at the bottom. I don't know, there's just something off about it that doesn't make it look very good. So for that reason, it's going to go into the meh category. It is getting PBR next update, so that might change it a little bit for me. But as of right now, it's going into meh. Next up, we have the Badger, and this is a tank that, well, it looks okay. It does have some weird angles, but I think they kind of work with the tank's overall design. The only thing is these two, like, I don't even know what to call them. They're like commander's ports, like viewports at the front. Those things just stick out like an eyesore. They look really, really bad. It's like someone was trying to build like a temple when they were designing this tank, but then they kind of just got lost at the back part here, and they just cut it off and made it a flat triangle, or a flat rectangle, sorry. Overall, the sides look okay. I mean, it's kind of like the 215B's side armor, so I really don't like the tiny little track wheels at the bottom. I think they're just disproportionate to the rest of the tank. So yeah, overall, I mean, it's not the worst looking tank, but I really just I'm not a big fan of it, so it's going to go into the meh category. Wow, a lot of the British tanks are just kind of meh looking, in my opinion. And oh boy, do we have an eyesore for you. Next up, we have the 4005. This is definitely one of the ugliest looking tanks in the entire game. I don't really understand what the whole concept of making a tank that's literally the size of 10 houses. I don't know what that concept really stemmed from, but it's hideous. The turret's not even a flat, it doesn't even have a flat top. It's kind of like, it angles at a weird angle up towards this big box at the back. It's like they're trying to store stuff in it, like a storage unit. It's just so weird. The hull looks okay. I kind of like the angled bit at the bottom there. I do like how the track wheels actually kind of match the rest of the tank's size. And I do like the look of the gun barrel, but the turret is just so ugly. This is definitely going in the goofy category. It's just such a goofy looking tank. Next up, we do have the 183, and I think this is another tank that looks really goofy. I did also forget to take the legendary camo off of it, because of course, I feel like reviewing these tanks' looks without any sort of camos adding to it, adding to the appeal or taking away from the appeal, is more unbiased. So yeah, the 183, I think it looks better than the 4005. I don't exactly think that's really saying much because the 4005 is so ugly. This tank does look okay though. I think the overall turret design is fine-ish. I don't like how far out this front part sticks though. It's kind of like a weird triangle piece. I don't know. Overall, honestly, it's not a great looking tank, but again, it's not as bad as the 4005, so that's going to go into the goofy category, or sorry, not goofy category. That's going to go into the meh category. My bad. Next up, we have the start of the Japanese tanks, the STB-1. This is a tank that I really like the look of. I like how low profile it is. Again, you're going to see, like, kind of what I like to look at in terms of tanks. I do like the turret shape. I think the gun mantlet fits in well with the overall tank. It doesn't really stick out too much. It does have a little bit of a hatch sticking out on top, but I think overall, considering the rest of the turret has, like, guns and stuff on it, I think it doesn't stick out too much to where it's, like, an eyesore. Honestly, the back, although it's pretty rectangular, it does have some, like, kind of angled bits on the side, so I do think it looks pretty good. And overall, I think the gun matches the overall, like, rest of the tank's size. And I do like the turret position, where it's kind of, it's not right at the front, but it's not kind of also in a weird spot either at the middle. So yeah, I think this is a good looking tank. I'm going to put it into the looks maxing category. It's not as good looking as a tank like the 140, but for mediums, it is definitely up there. Next up, we have the Type 71, and this is basically just a heavy tank version of the STB, as you can see here. The turret design is very similar. It is more boxy than the STB, and overall, it is a lot larger. Like, you can see how much bigger it is, but I do think this tank looks pretty good, even though it has a kind of weird hatch on the side, like on the side of the top of the turret there. I do like the angles of the front, and the upper plate looks pretty good. The rear is very boxy, but I think it kind of works with the rest of the design. So in my opinion, this is going to go into the looks maxing category. I think it looks pretty good for what it is here. As you can see, I just put it into this category here. So there we go. That's the Type 71. Next up, we have the Hori, and this thing is just literally a shoe. There's not much not much else to really say about it, sorry. It has this, like, this almost looks like an ice cream truck, like, you know those things on ice cream trucks where, like, they kind of serve you out of the back? This looks like one of those, or like a hot dog stand at the back. It looks really weird. I don't like how flat and how boxy the whole design looks. They just shoved an extra gun in the very center of the front plate of this tank. Yeah, overall, this tank does not look very good. It's going to go into the meh category because it's not, like, super, super ugly to where I think it's goofy looking, but it's definitely not a very good looking tank. Next up, we're moving on to the Chinese tanks here, starting off with the WZ-132-1. This is a tank that I do actually kind of like the look of. I like the sort of metal, like, bars that are kind of going around the turret. I think it looks similar to a Type 62, which I do like the look of. I think the turret overall, it matches the rest of the tank well in terms of size, and its gun looks pretty good as well. I do like the side skirts. I like how they're almost a different color to the rest of the tank. And for that reason, this tank is going into the decent to looks maxing category. I'm sort of in between those two for what I want to place it. It's, you know what, it's going to go into decent. No, it's going to looks maxing. Again, like, it's close. It's in between the two. It's definitely not the best looking tank, but it is fairly good looking overall. So, what do we have next? We have the 121. Now, of course, this is a tank that kind of has the same sort of shape as the Russian tanks. However, I think it's just longer than the Russian tanks, which kind of hurts the overall look of it. As well, the front track wheels, the two at the front, are just so much more spaced out than the rest, which just looks so off. I don't know why they did that. They could have spaced them out equally and it would have looked great, but because of that, that kind of ruins it, as well as the turret is pretty pushed to the front. It could be, if it was centered, like, I think if the turret was centered in the tank, it would look better, but because it's more frontally located, as well as the tracks are just kind of weird looking, I think this tank is going to go into the meh category, or not meh, sorry, the decent category, because it does look decent, because it is based off of, like, the Russian tank looks, but it's nothing special. So there we go, decent category for the 121. Next up, we have the 113, or no, it's not, sorry, not the 113, the 121B. This is a tank that looks very similar to the 62A in many different ways. For that reason, I do think it's a good-looking tank, but again, like the 121, for whatever reason, the Chinese tanks, they just have this weird track wheel that's, like, super spaced out at the front. For that reason, I don't like it as much as the 62A, so it's kind of, like, in between meh and decent. It's probably going to go into decent, because it's not ugly in any way. It's just sort of meh. Like, it's okay. It's okay. It's nothing special. So yeah, it's going to go in there, but it would be between meh and decent if I could do that. Next up, we have the WZ-111 5A. This tank looks okay. I really don't like how far forward the turret is. I do think the gun has a good size to it. I think it looks kind of nice compared to the rest of the tank because of how long the tank is. Again, I think it works well. But yeah, the turret is just so far forward. It almost just looks like it was squished forward. And I don't know. I think the rear is okay. It has some okay angles. They kind of remind me of the IS-7 rear. But I just don't like the front of it. I think if the front was like a flat plate instead of a pike nose to match what the lower plate looks like, it would look better. But because of that, it's going to go into the meh category. It's not horrible, but I'm not a big fan of the look of it. So there we go. It's in the meh category. Next up, we have the 113, which in my opinion is a really good looking tank. I think it basically takes what the 5A has in terms of its overall shape and kind of style, and then it makes it look better. Because the turret is more centered, I think the tank's proportions look better. I do like the gun size compared to the turret and the hull, and I do think the angle of the upper plate looks so much better than the 5A's upper plate. So for that reason, it's going to go into the looks maxing category. I do really like the look of it here. Oh, I keep forgetting to change back. So yeah, this tank, it will go into the looks maxing category there because I do really like the look of the 113. I think it's a pretty solid looking tank. Next up, we have, are we still in the, yeah, we're at the 114 SP2. This thing, it's basically just a worse looking version of like an E100. It has like a similar boxy turret design, but I don't know. I think the turret's too long to really make it work with the rest of the tank. Honestly, the tank is just too long in general. I think it's too big. The gun looks pretty good, though. I will give it that. And overall, I mean, it doesn't really have anything bad going for it in terms of its looks, but it's just nothing special. So for that reason, I will be putting it into the decent category. Nothing horrible, but nothing special either. Next up, we have the BZ-75. This tank doesn't look very good, in my opinion. I really don't like the angles at the front. I think the turret design is very strange. It's got this, like, flat part in the very center on either side of the gun, which just looks weird. Overall, I don't know. There's just something off about it. The back is so flat compared to the front. Like, if it had more angles at the back, especially on the turret, it might look better. But as of right now, I just don't think it's a very good-looking tank. I think it's going to go into the meh category there. Next up, we have the... Where am I looking here? Oh, yeah. We have the WZ-113 GFT, and this is literally just a box. I don't really think there's anything special with it. It's not a bad-looking tank, but it's just so boring. Like, there's nothing going on. It has the rear of, like, basically the 113, in my opinion. Yeah, it's pretty similar to the rear of the 113. But I just don't think it looks very good. I think the overall gun kind of, like, the mantlet sticks out too much from the rest of the tank. So for that reason, this tank will be going into the meh category in terms of looks. It's not horrible, it's just really boring, and it's just a big box at the end of the day. Next up, we have the Bat Chat here. Now, this tank, it looks okay. I think the turret's a bit out of proportion with the rest of the tank. I think if the turret was a bit smaller, kind of like a UDES-looking turret, then it might be better. But it's just kind of sticking out, and the hatch is enormous on the top, now that I'm looking at it. The hull looks pretty cool, though. I do like how small the tank is, in terms... it's a short-looking tank, so I think the gun size matches with the rest of the vehicle. It is also pretty wide, which I think works well with the vehicle's shape. So, honestly, it's not a bad-looking tank. It's just not one of my favorites, so it's going to go into decent. There we go. Now, we have the 30B up next, and this tank I actually really like the look of. Even though it has a, like, T95 E6 massive hatch on top, I think it almost works with the shape of the tank. It kind of looks like a UFO kind of turret, and I really like that about it. I think the turret matches with the hull's design, and the gun kind of works, again, with the rest of the design. So, although it's not, like, the prettiest looking tank, but I do actually like the look of it a lot, in fact, especially since they gave it PBR. So I know maybe some of you don't like the look of it, but I'm actually going to put it into looks maxing. I think it looks pretty good, especially for a tank with a lot of weird angles and kind of hatches on top of it. Next up, we have the AMX M4 MLE. This tank is just massive. Like, the hull is huge. The turret is absolutely massive. The gun mantlet sticks out a ton from the rest of the turret. There's no real, like, turret front. It's all just gun mantlet. It's kind of crazy, actually. And there's a lot of weird angles going on. I think the hatches and these, like, weird nubs that stick out of the side of the tank's turret, I think they kind of look out of place. I do like the design of the hull, though. I think the rear of the hull has a kind of cool angle that goes inwards. I do like the front of it. So it's not a horrible looking tank. It's also not great, though, in my opinion. So it's going to go into the decent category alongside the Bat Chat here. Next up, we have the 50B. And oh boy, is this tank ugly. I don't know if any of you guys like the look of the 50B, but the turret is way too big for the rest of the tank. It sticks out so much. And I just think it's hideous. Like, why is there a weird oscillating part to the turret? It almost looks like a mouth. It's really, really weird. I really don't like the look of this tank at all. I think the fact that the hull kind of gets squished in between the tracks at the front, but at the back it doesn't, is just very, very odd. Yeah, I don't think this tank looks good at all. I think it's deserving of the goofy category placement there. Next up, we have the Foch 155. A tank that I absolutely hate playing, but honestly, it's an okay looking tank. I think the boxy design almost works well for it, because of the fact that it has big side skirts going over the tracks. The overall angling of the front looks decent. I think the way the gun mantlet is positioned kind of in the middle, in another, like, triangular-ish shape kind of works well. The gun's size works well with the rest of the tank. The only thing that's really an eyesore is the hatch. The right-hand side hatch is pretty ugly, but it's not a horrible-looking tank, so for that reason, I'll put it in the decent category for now. Again, nothing really special about it, but it's not all that awful either. Next up, we have the TVP. Now, this tank, honestly, I do like the look of it. I think its turret is a little bit weird compared to the rest of the hull in terms of its shape, because it has such a round turret, but then it has all these like boxy angles on the hull. But I do like the rear. I like how it has the gas cans or whatever and the log at the back. I like the overall track design of it. I like how the track wheels aren't super tiny. And overall, I mean, it's a pretty sleek looking tank. So in my opinion, definitely not the best looking tank, but it is going to go up into looks maxing. I think it looks pretty solid. Next up, we have probably my favorite looking tank in the entire game. There is going to be some bias with this, but I absolutely love the look of the Carro. I think it's such a well-balanced tank in terms of where the turret is placed, how the turret's armor sloping matches the hull. I like how the back has kind of a unique design to it. It's not just one singular rectangle. It has these kind of like vents at the back. I like how the gun mantlet is positioned in the middle of the turret with a little bit of armor sticking out to kind of give it a unique look. I think this tank looks absolutely fantastic. It is definitely going into the Giga Chad category. This tank is a Giga Chad among tanks in terms of its looks, in my opinion. Next up, we have the CS63. Now, this tank actually doesn't look all that bad. I do like how low profile it is. The kind of track wheels are pretty small, but I think it works. And even though it has this weird, like, angle thing, like, sticking out of the back of the turret, it almost kind of helps because the turret is so small and it's pushed so far forward, that I think it does look good. I also like the angling at the back. I think it's pretty unique, and the gun matches with the dimensions of the rest of the tank. So for that reason, it's going to go into the looks maxing category here. Just a second. There we go. Here it is. We're going to put it in the looks maxing category up with the TVP, as I think it looks pretty solid. Next up, we have the Progetto. This tank, well, it doesn't look very good. I think it has a really weird turret design. I do like the angling of the hull. I think the back looks pretty good. The front looks pretty good, but it's just that turret. It's super long, and it's, like, attached at the front, but, like, then you just have this back part that just hangs out so much further than the rest of the turret. I think that kind of ruins it for me. The gun also has this weird look to it, but honestly, I don't mind it. It's just not my favorite. So for that reason, I think it's going to go into the decent category. Again, nothing horrible, but nothing special either. Next up, we have the VZ55. This tank is, again, kind of, it's a decent looking tank. Nothing really crazy special about it. I think the lower plate is way too big in terms of its looks. Like, it's so big. It's almost as big as the upper plate itself. And I don't really like these extra spaced armor things on the front of the turret. I think that kind of makes it have a weird look to it. The back of the turret is also kind of weird as well. It kind of angles upwards again. Yeah, I don't know. It's not a crazy bad-looking tank, but I don't know. There's just something about it that's off to me. So it's going to go into the decent category. Nothing horrible, but again, yeah, it's decent. Next up, we have the Strv K. Now, this tank, I do like the look of it, but in another way, I think the turret's kind of out of place. Because this is the hull of a Kron, whenever I look at it, I just can't get the Kron's image out of my head, because that's the kind of turret design I would expect to see on a hull like this, not really a Centurion-style turret. So although the turret isn't horrible, it's not exactly symmetrical. Like, again, like the 4202 turret, it kind of has these weird cutouts, and its overall design is just kind of a weird triangle-ish shape, with the front of it being pretty flat. So yeah, I don't really think the turret matches the hull's design. So in my opinion, it's just going to go into the meh category. Nothing crazy bad, but I just don't really like the overall design of how the turret matches with the hull. Next up, we have the Rhino. Now this tank, yeah, it's not great. It doesn't look very good. It looks like someone has a receding hairline. I'm not going to lie. This tank looks like it has a receding hairline. Like, look at this. It's like you have the back of the turret that goes up a bit in this like boxy kind of look, and then it just gets cut off like halfway through. Like, I'm telling you, this looks like a bald person with like that's kept the back of their hair still on without shaving fully. I don't know. It's just really, really weird to me. I don't really like how the gun's just this one like middle section that sticks out super far. It almost looks like a Concept 1B was like merged into like a Carro in a way. Like, it's just, it doesn't look good. The hull overall has a weird round shape at the front, but then these like kind of cool angles at the back. I do like the rear of the tank's hull, but I think the front kind of ruins that. So yeah, overall, this is not a very good looking tank in my opinion. I think it definitely deserves to go into the goofy category because like that turret is just so awful. I can't get that out of my brain. Yeah. Anyways, next up we have the Swedish Kron. Now this tank, again, I think the turret matches the overall hull's design more. I think it lines up well with the hull, and although the turret does have this weird part that sticks out at the end of it, I think it works well with how long the tank is. And honestly, it is a unique design after all, but I think it's one that works, again, like I said, the hull works with the turret, and I think the gun's size also works with the rest of the tank. So although it has some weird angles on it and little bits sticking out, I do think this tank looks decent. So for that reason, it is going to go into the decent category, higher up than the Strv K because I like the turret shape more, but overall, nothing crazy. Next up, we have the 60 TP. I think this tank looks great. I honestly like how oversized the turret is on this sort of tank. It looks almost like an IS-7 kind of turret shape where it's super, super round. I do like the front, how it kind of connects in the middle and the gun's like directly at the front in the it's like kind of triangulated towards the gun, which kind of looks cool. I do like the hull's different angles, and overall I think the width of the tank matches with how big the turret is. Even though the track wheels are pretty small for this type of vehicle, I just think the overall design works, and I think the gun's size also looks pretty cool. It is pretty unique, and there's just a lot of unique features, like I said, going for this tank. So I honestly like the look of it. It's going to go into looks maxing. Again, a lot of you are probably going to disagree with that, but I do like the look of the 60 TP. So there you go. And finally, we reached the last tank of the video. Wow, this was a long video, like 50 minutes long. Holy cow. I don't know how many of you guys are actually going to watch this whole video, but anyways, here is the Minnow. Now, this tank has a big flaw in terms of its looks, and that is the turret. Yes, this tank is not a non-turreted TD. It actually has a turret, and the turret is sunken into the hull in the weirdest way. It has this super weird angle where the back of the turret sticks up past the hull, but then the rest is sunken in, and the front of it is just so flat because the turret is so far forward. I just don't think the tank works at all in terms of a design perspective. The rear of the tank looks okay, but yeah, the front and the turret just ruin the thing completely for me. I really don't like it at all. So for that reason, it's going to go into the goofy category. And that concludes the tier list. I don't really think I'm going to change any tanks around, really. I think I'm pretty happy with where all of these are going. So yeah, I think overall it's a pretty good tier list. Let me know what you guys think down below, obviously in the comments. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to disagree, but that's the whole fun of it. And this is just a fun video. This is not a serious topic whatsoever. So keep that in mind. And for any of you out there who are not yet subscribed to my channel, I highly recommend you do so, as it's a fantastic way to support my content, as well as stay up to date when I post videos almost daily. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.